Palo IT is a global innovation consultancy and agile software development company, and we are dedicated to helping organizations embrace tech as a force for good. This is why we have joined forces with our partner BSR to reflect together today on what it takes to align the two mega trends shaping businesses today: the digital transformation on one hand and the sustainability imperative on the other hand. And according to research, almost 60% of IT decision makers say that pressures stemming from COVID-19 are accelerating the digital transformation efforts, while over 75% of executives agree that organizations need to be dramatically re-engineered and they're re-engineer the experiences that bring together technology and people in a more human-centric manner. And there is often the fantasy that AI and automation create an environment where human beings no longer have a place. And for sure, the good, the bad, and the ugly have been seen. But at Palo IT and BSR, we believe that technology can also be a launchpad for positive impacts. So hence our webinar today. So everyone welcome. We have about an hour and a half together. We'll run a Q&A session at the end. So make sure to actually post your questions directly in the chat and we'll address them toward the end. And so without further ado, I have the pleasure to welcome our wonderful speakers with international expertise at the crossroad of business strategy, tech, data, machine learning, and sustainability. We have the pleasure to welcome Alice Steenland, Chief Sustainability Officer at Dassault Systèmes, Jonathan Morris, Sustainability Expert at consulting firm BSR, Business for Social Responsibility, and Ahmed Ramdani, co-founder and CTO of Paleo IT Lyon office, expert in designing digital solutions, big data, and machine learning platforms. So I'll let our speakers introduce themselves and their organization and also tell us a little bit what keep them up at night. So maybe Jonathan, if you want to go ahead and present yourself, you have the floor.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Stephanie. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I just want to say thank you to everyone joining the line. Really happy to have you with us as well. Again, my name is Jonathan. I'm an associate director leading technology sectors in EMEA for BSR. Just a few words on my organization. We're a business network and a consultancy working exclusively on corporate sustainability, so with the private sector. Our model is fairly unique. We actually are a membership model, so we work with nearly 300 global companies at any one time, of course, in the tech space, but also across all industries, from consumer products to healthcare, to transportation and logistics, to heavy industrials as well. And with these companies, we act as an external third party to design and implement sustainability strategies on a range of issues. They can be corporate-wide, or they can be issue-specific, like diversity and inclusion strategy, or climate change, or supply chain. And with tech in particular, we're working at the intersection of human rights and technology. So thinking of the potential implications of established and emerging tech from major actors like Google, Facebook, or SAP, and also with the more high growth companies like a Zoom or an Okta. And what keeps me up at night, to answer Stephanie's question, is just the sheer rate of change in the tech space today, and that we are always running to try and help establish, identify, and mitigate the potential implications, negative implications, and challenges that tech could pose, to make sure we can also focus on the positive. So that's it from me. I'll share more in a second. And yeah, I look forward to our session. Thanks.
Alice, do you want to go next?
Sure, happy to. So happy to be with everyone today. My name is Alice Steenland. I'm the Chief Sustainability Officer of Dassault Systèmes, which is a company that makes virtual twins, basically. So I'll talk a little bit more about what that means later and why it's relevant for sustainability. About my own background, I have been working in the sustainability field for more than 20 years now, both in consulting capacity and ratings agencies, a little bit in some nonprofits, and was the founding chief sustainability officer of AXA, which is a global financial services group. So a lot of experience in the finance sector. So I'm relatively new to tech, although we did do a lot of tech in insurance, oddly enough. And so I'm learning a lot, applying what I know of sustainability to the tech sector. And this is one of the things that one of the things I'm excited about. What keeps me up at night, I had not thought about that. I mean, I think like most sustainability people, I am very, very, very worried. I am very worried about my kids not having food within 10 years because our global system is starting to collapse, and we're starting to hit those planetary boundaries faster than we thought. So sort of that existential fear, which is not a really fun topic for a webinar, but that actually is something that keeps me up very often at night.
Absolutely. And this is also why we're here, is to actually try to find solutions and fast. Ahmed, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Very happy to be here with you. I'm the CTO and co-founder of PaloEthi's Lyon office in France. Before that, I was working in PaloEthi in Paris for five years, where I was the business developer and responsible of building the expertise around big data solutions and machine learning platforms for PaloEthi. And so I have a background of a technical guy. I'm an engineer in computer science. Many more than 20 years on expertise on different building digital solutions for different businesses, like banking, insurance, media, retail and distribution, and so on. I moved from really technical profile to include a business and the impactful vision of my expertise. That's why I'm here to share my technical vision on different solutions, AI and so on, and the link to do with the impact design and the sustainable vision of our work. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And by means of introduction to the topic, Jonathan, I'm going to have you open up the topic. So according to you, and building on your work at BSR, advising the most influential companies on tech, mapping tech and sustainability, what are the emerging issues that you see on artificial intelligence, automation, and the impacts, whether they are positive or negative?
Yes, it's a great question. It's a fundamental question. I think I've been given the task of trying to answer that question in 5 minutes, which I will likely fail to do, but I'll do my best to keep it relatively concise. Happy to unpack it later. I say it that way because, again, it calls back to what Alice mentioned. This is an existential question. We can't just think of AI, emerging technology, in a vacuum. We have to look at the context that we're living in currently, and not just the COVID context, but we'll talk about that. But over the course of time, the demographic explosion, planetary boundary limits being reached in some ways because of tech, but other types of tech, like the agricultural and industrial revolutions. Those were technological applications. Thinking about the economic transition today, thinking about the energy transition that we're going through, thinking about the effects of climate change and global warming, and coming back to it, the COVID-19 crisis, which we still haven't quite come out of. We don't understand necessarily the long-term ramifications. So we need to think about what is the future that we're building? What are the conditions that are going to create a balanced social and environmental model that will preserve and help mankind to flourish in the future? So that's just where I start my thoughts. But when we get into the topic around AI, artificial intelligence, automation, natural language processing, other emerging tech, you know, this is something that we definitely see as a positive. AI will continue our progress as mankind. It will allow companies to gain in efficiency and productivity. You know, as far as I see it, this can also be, automation can also be an opportunity for companies to offer their employees upskilling and training if there is a potential for job displacement, really giving them the opportunity to move into new roles and to be more future-proof in their own roles. We're entering into this era of new qualitative jobs for the workers themselves and more qualified requirements on jobs for companies. So when we think about this context for companies, you know, really by transforming business models in this way, we're also addressing a social and societal problem, especially as we see, you know, tech being applied to many industries and the economy becoming more and more services rather than product oriented. But what I do want to talk about, since I'm the sustainability guy, is a little bit of doom and gloom. I do want to add a few cautions to that sort of, you know, perpetual march of progress. I can't just talk about the positives. The context is that not all is good in tech. You know, there are inherent pitfalls in the use of tech, in the misuse of tech, or the damaging use of automation and AI in particular, when we talk about things like discrimination and abuse. So, you know, in response to COVID-19, which is a perfect example of pressure being put on the system, companies have really moved quickly to automate their processes, to virtualize their processes. And when we move quickly, we don't necessarily have the time, the mechanisms, or the processes in place to really account for potential risk. You know, this last year, as an example, has shown us that as a result of virtualization, women, for example, have not been given the same opportunities as men, especially for jobs that require, you know, the supervision of a wide variety of teams and activities at the same time, which is to say, multitasking is incorrectly seen as a predominantly masculine trait. You know, this is the type of bias that we try to avoid when we're moving forward, but it's hard when we're moving fast. On the other hand, you know, the way we even think about AI automating tasks is often misunderstood. You know, we think about a future with fully automated factories, with no human intervention, but today I think we realize, even in the most aggressive projections, and this is not me saying it, this is others working on the future of work, like the World Economic Forum, that only around 30% of an employee's actual daily work is likely to be automated. So we're not really talking about a future where entire workforces are laid off. Yes, there will of course be certain industries or certain instances where a percentage of a workforce might need to be displaced or reskilled, but in most scenarios we're talking about, you know, automating otherwise rote or administrative tasks. And then, you know, on this sort of preamble part, I also want to note that climate change is very much linked to the discussion. It's having an effect on all of this. Things like natural disasters, things like disease. When we take COVID, it's not disconnected from climate. We are entering into ecosystems and bringing them back to our own ecosystems in ways that we haven't before. Climate change also produces additional health risks like COVID, and these types of health crises, you know, that require us to stay home. This is all related to the pressure on further automation. So let me just sort of finish this whole non-5-minute intervention by putting, I guess, a pin on 3 important types of risks that we're talking about. So the 3 types are bias and discrimination, unintended use, and misuse. So on the first one, on the bias side of things, you know, it's important for me to note that sometimes algorithms are biased. In fact, they're all biased to an extent. Algorithms are made by man. Bias is an inherent part of our nature. And so to an extent, we can't avoid a certain amount of bias, but we try to work it out. Since AI learns from historical data, it means that the bias actually comes from that data set. So for example, you know, facial recognition algorithms like those used by big tech, Apple, Amazon, Microsoft, you know, we've seen that certain applications of this tech were not likely to recognize Black faces as easily as they were white faces. So if we try to create a product based on these technologies, we have to take into account not only skin color, but all the types of potential bias or discrimination, which requires a certain amount of research or due diligence ahead of time. And on that discrimination side, you know, we at BSR recently put together a review for Google on the human rights impacts of AI used in celebrity recognition products. You might think that's very niche, but that's as far as we need to go today to really understand the potential impacts. And we found that, interestingly enough, the lack of consensus on the word, the definition of the word celebrity, could potentially impact things that you might not think linked, like child rights, if they are inadvertently included in a celebrity database. So this means a developer of tech needs to be really informed, needs to be a sustainability expert, needs to be aware of the impact to eliminate bias or discrimination, even in the design phase, and thinking about whether data sets are representative or if it includes bias by design, whether audiences or rights holders have been engaged or given their consent or opted in before any potential discriminatory activities. It's just a lot of work to figure out what to be aware of. So I'm only on number 2 now. Second, unintended use, will be done soon. Technologies are obviously designed with certain use cases in mind, which are usually extremely well defined and documented and provided to users. But we increasingly see developers or designers, specifically of AI, deploying it to other industries, not typical tech. It's not only tech companies now, or as we say at BSR, we're all tech companies now to an extent, which means developers need to rethink, or need to think differently rather, about use. What data can theoretically be captured in a product? What technical limitations might force a user to actually go outside of intended use to reach their objectives? Even sellers and resellers need to think, what is the use case? Will it help reinforce bias or discrimination? We think of companies like H&M, Novartis, L'Oreal. These are not tech companies traditionally, but they're using AI increasingly in products, in their marketing, and they are now establishing mechanisms, since they see that there is potential risk, to actually evaluate that risk in the use phase and mitigate it. And then third is the question around misuse of technology essentially for unethical purposes. And here's, a moment where we say, like, testing is great. Trying to understand the use of technology is extremely helpful. But when tech enters the real world, it's often used for purposes other than those that have been intended by the developer. And this also increases the responsibility of companies to think about mechanisms to actually monitor the use of that tech in the use phase. So for example, Salesforce, this is ongoing litigation, so I can't get into details, and it's not linked to BSR, of course, but Salesforce we see is being sued by 50 victims of human trafficking because inadvertently Backpage was using information and facilitating information via Salesforce to pursue human trafficking activities. So, we at BSR have developed guidance for our member companies that we work with to think through the questions that they should ask at each stage of product development, and notably as part of due diligence in the use phases of tech. And here, even with these 3 issues, we haven't really even begun to unravel everything, talk about the issues around data privacy and security, or the issues around mental health and well-being in a virtualized society. And these are, of course, equally important in today's world of heightened transparency. But I only had 5 minutes and I took 15. So there's only so much I can get into now. I'm going to pause and turn back to Stephanie.
No, thank you, Jonathan. This is, of course, very important to obviously know the risks first, and then try to eliminate them, to actually think it in a more positive manner in terms of impact. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Ahmed, maybe actually from a technical point of view, it would be interesting to understand how, what it takes to prevent those risks on the technology front, on the technical front, and build and even build tech and AI solution, automation, predictive models, etc., that put positive impact at core. So what does it take from the technical point of view?
Thank you, Stephanie. I'm totally aligned with what Jonathan says. Just it's true for technology, but it's more sensible for AI, because AI is very special buzzword today. I don't like this term AI, artificial intelligence, because for me it's a language abuse, and it's confusing and misleading for people, because we imagine something that is autonomous, conscious, and able to adapt and to observe the world and adapt this behavior. But in reality, we are more talking about intelligent algorithms or automatic learning. So this terms, yeah, automatic learning is just a way to use machines that are able to perform terrific quantity of calculations and in a incredibly short amount of time, which human beings are not able to do. So they are really probabilistic and algorithms that are able to process big amount of data in a very short time to help people take decisions and improve productivity in different areas of business. As Jonathan said very well, there are always two sides of the same coin. The technology and automation is frightening because of the increase of unemployment. Sorry, it could imply. But if we look closer, we can see that technology and these improvements, if they are used in a good intention and a goodwill, they can help better share information and knowledge, push forward the optimization of the production, and help to reclassify part of the population to encourage training, education, for example. But these algorithms and this AI and these digital tools can help also, could be very useful to help reduce the carbon footprint of our solutions, our industry, our platforms, our applications. Because of, in a technical point of view, we can say that today we are using machine learning in an intensive way to, but also digital models, 3D design solutions, 3D printing solutions as well, help better design, better impact analysis, help forecast and do predictions, and so help prevent overconsumption, breakdowns, system and human being security issues, and also work-related accidents, for example, and also production and environmental disasters. So we cannot, I think, embrace this the challenges we have in the future without using technology to help this impact. As example, I can mention DeepFold, for example. I don't know if a lot of people have heard about DeepMind, who developed AlphaGo, the solution that was able to beat Lee Sedol, one of the highest ranked players in the world of the Go game. Yeah, we could say that this is not really useful because it's not just challenging humans in games, but in fact, this now DeepMind is using their technology to help solve protein folding problems, and now they are really performing better than a lot of laboratories that are specialized in this field, and this will help really improve and bring a major breakthrough contribution to healthcare, pharmaceutical solutions for biologic problems and so on, for example. And I can mention other examples that all the companies that are working today in, for example, self-driving algorithms to help secure and improve security on the roads and preserve lives, for example.
Thank you, Ahmed. Yes, of course, there are some many examples, and maybe actually, Jonathan, you from your work with big companies, you have other examples to share on how tech, machine learning, AI are actually contributing to push the envelope of sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a lot of examples at BSR. But good transition. One of the most outstanding actually is Dassault Systems, which is great. Again, Alice mentioned they use virtual twin technology, which is really compelling in the world of sustainability to analyze different product use scenarios and figure out potential impacts before a product is released to market. I can only speak so much to it. Alice can speak better. But yes, we've stacked the deck a bit today since Alice and Dassault Systems or 3DS is a BSR member. So we're a bit biased ourselves in our choice of speaker, I recognize, but I promise it wouldn't have been the case if their work, didn't actually have such a high potential positive sustainability impact. So with that, why don't I turn it over, Alice? Maybe you can share with us a little bit more on 3DS's work.
Yeah, sure. Happy to, and happy to have snuck into this event. Thanks to Jonathan. We do sincerely think that this kind of technology is really interesting for sustainability, and so anyway, happy to share about that. I have a few slides, so I know people are sort of slided out, but we will do. Let's see if this works. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfectly.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll just walk through this because I before I mentioned I have worked in sustainability for a really long time, but have done a lot of work in the financial services sector and had never really, I had heard the term digital twin or virtual twins, but I'd never really thought about them, and I had never really understood exactly what they do. So this is for those of you like me out there who are curious about this, and happy to answer questions afterwards. But this technology, you hear when you hear about sustainability, you hear a lot about AI, and you hear about blockchain, and you hear about sort of satellite technologies, and all these things that are clearly going to play a role, sensor technology, IoT, very clear sort of use cases of how that will work with work to help drive the sustainability transformation. But I had heard personally less about virtual twins, and I was very surprised when I first met this company, Dassault Systems, about how embedded this technology actually already is into global manufacturing systems. So it's sort of a question of, you don't need to adopt totally new practices. You can take actually some of the software and the tools you're using today and just tweak them to help solve a new problem. And so that's a lot of what I spend my day-to-day, a lot of my day-to-day work is spent about sort of trying to tweak a virtual twin to make it focus on sustainability and help our customers do that. So Dassault Systems is a company who defined its corporate purpose many years ago, many years before I joined, as being about sustainable innovation. So enabling sustainable innovation, capable of harmonizing product, nature, and life. So this idea of building sustainability in all of its senses, social and environmental and economic, building that thinking into the way companies innovate via its software has always been sort of a driving, I would say, driving purpose within the organization. So concretely, sort of who are we? It's a company with 20,000 employees, 188 sites worldwide. We have about close to 300,000 customers. Some of these are very big, some of these are very small. It's a company whose technology is sort of on the cutting edge of digital, and so it's been very often cited as a very future-facing company with a lot of awards about being very innovative, et cetera. On the right-hand side, you see some of our sustainability awards as well, because a lot of organizations do see this connection to sustainability in what we do. And then our memberships, including, of course, our favorite BSR. So we're part of these global networks of sustainability corporate membership organizations, and that's very important to the way we collaborate. This is just a snapshot of our strategy to give you an overview of everything we're working on, and then I'll deep dive on the product itself. But we have these three pillars of our sustainability strategy for 2025. Experience the change is very much about us as an organization. So this is like walking the talk. How do we run our own direct operations? So that's about science-based targets. We have an announcement coming out on, you guys are in the know before it's released. So this Thursday, so tomorrow, we will be releasing the fact that our science-based targets were validated and our net zero ambition that goes along with this. Other areas of sustainability around diversity and inclusion, around employee engagement, ethics, those types of things are all on our radar as top priorities within this 2025 plan. Then the second pillar is called Harmonize the Portfolio, and that is very much about taking the purpose and applying it concretely to how we develop products. So we have a target to reach 2/3 of all new licenses as sold by 2025 as having sustainability impact. A core element of that will be a function that we're releasing in the next couple of months around life cycle analysis, where you can basically transform anyone who uses our technology into an eco designer, thanks to this this function. And then the last piece is around collaboration, which is a lot about how we collaborate well, actually how we work on the other two pillars, and that is in a collaborative partnership mode. So including with these partnership organizations I mentioned earlier, but also how we work with our supply chain, for example, on our science-based targets ambition, how we work with employees. So notably this point on sustainable innovation challenges, we just launched a couple of weeks ago a global challenge for all employees around the circular economy. So how can we use our software to solve circular economy challenges? So how we're involving everyone and bringing them on this journey with us. And then there's just a footnote here on this slide, but just to let you know that these targets are something that are integrated into the CEO's remuneration, and now in fact the remuneration of the entire executive committee. And I think I have, so that speaks a little bit to the governance model and how we're trying to integrate that really at the highest level. We started the board level oversight of this strategy, and we build it into all sorts of incentive mechanisms. So that's kind of how we're driving the strategy behind the scenes. So I won't go too deep into this. This is sort of the crisis we're living in. I think the main point is that we actually are hitting planetary boundaries much faster than what we thought. So biodiversity collapse, the tipping point for climate change. And I think the big difference is that people are really feeling it now. So, wildfires across California, across Australia, sort of very extreme weather events. I used to work in the insurance sector. It's a very different world than it was just a few years ago. And I think people kept thinking this is for our children and this is for the next generation, but actually this is right now. And that's, I think, what's the consciousness. I think Jonathan mentioned the pandemic also as being linked to environmental degradation, and that's all of this is raising the consciousness about really the crisis we're in, and so the UN calls this the decade to deliver, and that's why this is important. So we have less than 10 years basically to radically transform the way we do things, and so incremental change is actually not an option anymore. We can't just do what we've done in the sustainability field for the last 30 years, which is each year we do a little bit better. We actually need to break with the system that we had before. So why this technology is interesting in that context is that it's actually used for disruptive innovation. So 75% of the wind power online today was designed, is run by wind turbines that are designed with this virtual technology. 85% of the world's electric vehicles. Then we have lots of other examples, like one of the world's first electric run glass manufacturing plants. We have lots of individual examples as well. But this is just to say that this technology is already being used today for anything that is very, very complex and that no one believed was possible. So things that are what we call moonshot ideas, things that nobody thinks can work. What you do is in a virtual universe, using a virtual twin, you can basically design anything and you can simulate its functioning to a degree of predictability that basically de-risks your innovation process. So you can create new materials at the molecular level. You can assemble them into a product. You can show how your manufacturing plant will work to manufacture this product. You can simulate all types of extreme environments to test that product. So heat and pressure and, how will it react to these things? And then you can go all the way to, how would it be dismantled in the end, and how would we recuperate the materials? And how would we be able to recycle it? So can we test the recyclability or the reusability of this thing? And so I say thing, there's 20% of our business is now in healthcare, in fact. So fun fact is that more than half of the COVID vaccine trials, clinical trials, were run in a virtual environment using our software. So this is being used for all sorts of things, but things are very easy to understand and very connected to the transformation we have to make. So if I come back to the wind turbine example, for example, this type of technology sort of same thing. Years ago, people didn't think it was possible. You had to basically build it in a virtual world, show how it would work, show how it would generate the electricity, show how it would resist the wind. And today, people are still using that to get these things on the market, because you can't build a prototype, a physical prototype of a wind turbine and put it on top of a mountain to test it, to show the regulator that it's fine and to certify it to be sold on the market. You do all of that in a virtual universe. And so you can get all the way up to the certification stage of a new technology just in this environment. So that's why the disruption piece, which is so important right now, given the time we have left, is going to be enabled largely by virtual twins. And then there's this other side of virtual twins, which is once you have built something, and this could be a city. This is systems of systems, virtual twins, a city or a power supply or transportation system. You actually can connect it to IoT technologies and get this constant feedback loop of data that's saying, okay, here's my virtual twin of whatever it is I've designed and built, and here's the feedback coming back from its use. And so I can do predictive maintenance. I can figure out where the problems are going to be. I can figure out what's not working, so I can go in and adjust it. So this is what turns a virtual twin from sort of more of an upstream exercise into a living operational model. So we call these living virtual twins. And that's another interesting piece. So I touched on this a little bit, that this is how virtual twins interact with the different phases of development in an organization. So in the research and development phase, we do a lot of work with large organizations focused on doing in silico development of new materials, life cycle modeling. In the design phase, like I said, you can do generative design. You can basically build your object and see if it works physically, and then simulate its use and simulate its resistance to certain pressures. Manufacturing, like I said, you can do a lot of this feedback loop and trying to optimize your operations. Transportation, same thing. You can optimize your logistics chain doing different models, and you can optimize it for CO2 reduction, for example. Product and asset use. I also talked about the sort of feedback loop aspect, and then the decommissioning and end of life. So you can model dismantling, you can model biodegradability, you can model all these things virtually. So that's a little explanation of what it is. And then our conviction is really that this is going to be critical for our customers, but more broadly for the world, to imagine and design radically new products, materials, and processes for tomorrow's sustainable economy, and to do this at the fastest possible speed, which means in less than 10 years. And then this is just to, I'm going to end here. This is just to say that we tried to essentially quantify some of this impact. So we worked last year and released at Davos in the virtual version in January, this paper, white paper, trying to quantify the use cases for virtual twins. And so we looked across cities and territories, consumer packaged goods, transportation, mobility, life science, high tech. And we identified a really strong use case where virtual twins are being used today and are making a big difference already on sustainability. And so we took those 5 cases and we said, if these 5 cases alone were used at scale across the industry, how much impact would that have in terms of CO2? And so we had pretty big sort of takeaways in terms of impact on talking about 7.5 gigatons. So just to put that in perspective, that is the emissions of the full transportation sector today. So that gives you an idea of the magnitude of impact this type of technology could have. A lot of it's about just getting new moonshot ideas onto the market faster. And so that's why we think it's gonna be a game changer. So I will stop there. I'm very happy to answer questions about virtual twins and the like.
Thank you so much, Alice. This is fascinating, and it's a very practical example of how, you know, thanks to technology, big, bold ideas, moonshot, as you call them, come into real life. And also thank you for and congratulations on your soft launch
Right.
and the net zero ambition announcement. And since you also mentioned the World Economic Forum, just to let you all know that on the Palo IT announcement, we have been selected by the World Economic Forum to join the program of the New Champion program, which gather fast-growing companies using tech as a force for good and developing sustainable growth model. So maybe I wanted to give the floor to Ahmed. Maybe he has a few things to add as on the technical front on AI tech and the AI and automation aspect. Ahmed,
Thank you,
anything to share?
Yeah, just to add, at Palo IT, in general, we are, as a technology experts, technology company, we are also highly engaged in tech for good and tech for impact strategy to try to target the right clients and the right ecosystems to be engaged in the fact that we want, by choice and by strategy, to use our expertise to build the next impactful solutions, businesses, and so on. Yeah, so this and we are working on training, exploring, learning, partnering to go further in green IT knowledge, in digital solutions, to see how we can do that. Especially, for example, if I come back to machine learning challenges, we at Palo IT were very proud to be engaged really to design machine learning solutions from ground up to take into account biases and the machine learning fairness. So we build solutions from the beginning and in a continuous way to monitor and evaluate bias metrics. We work depending on the area we are applying the machine learning algorithms. We try to consciously identify the discriminations that could exist depending on the decisions that this solution will take, and then work especially in these discrimination groups to be sure that we can design metrics, and then we can continuously monitor the models to be sure that we have representative data to train the models, and we are avoiding data drifts over time, and also model drift over time because yeah, the idea is not AI is not a magic solution that is conscious. We design the solution, and we have the responsibility to monitor and to see if we are the outcomes are fair and equitable or not. In a more general perspective, at Palo IT, we are exploring, training, and deploying also expertise on what we call impact design. It's a methodology that uses design to solve global societal challenges, so that we can influence system challenges business models at our customers. We are building that in partnership with our customers, but as experts, designers, coaches in Agile, we cannot ignore the challenges we have, and we try to be really good partners to explore these things with our customers. And so we work in the fact that we need to identify the positive impact we want over the technology or the solution or the business model we are, or the platform, digital platform we are building, and help measure this positive impact, even if it is the client strategy, holistic strategy on that, or is it a first steps in exploring this to tackle these sustainable challenges. Our approach is I said collaborative and the feedback focused. Sorry. So we are really engaged in rapid prototyping, meaningful launches, purposeful metrics, monitoring, as I said, in machine learning, but also in designing solutions, exploring, doing user research to understand. And for example, we can talk about two projects we are proud to work on. A solution that we call empathic AI for modern workplaces. So Palo IT is partnering with Neuron Health startup in Hong Kong to run intensive research and predictive models to better understand why and how people were using the platforms, the work platform, the collaborative platform, and also the tools to improve the well-being for the employees, for example. We are also working in a sustainable agriculture and farming solution to push it as open source solution to the farming communities. And this is based on open source, low technology, frugal solutions to help. For example, we started and we were prototyping with a vanilla growing farm in Cambodia, and we are taking account the fact that most of the farms in the world have low energy availability. They have to economize and use very wisely water, energy, and so on, for example. That's all. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Amit, for sharing these practical tech in action. And as you were saying, there is it's obviously a matter of sustainable growth and how tech can enable new business models and help the economy become more circular, really, as we have a decade to deliver, as Alice was just saying. So maybe we can reflect a little bit on the future of tech and AI, and especially in the current regulatory context. I'm thinking notably about the new green taxonomy. And Alice, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on this, the disruption that this regulatory context will bring in the near,
Yeah,
the
I
future.
think it's I think it is quite a game changer. There's a lot of regulation coming on in Europe that in the EU that is going to be a game changer, both in terms of carbon and climate, also in terms of the circular economy. And actually, its reach goes far, far beyond the EU. And I think that's something that's interesting. You're also seeing the US and China both working directly with the EU to talk about this concept of taxonomy and see if we can start aligning. And I'll just give you a practical example of why that would be important. So the taxonomy so taxonomy means classification system, right? So it's a classification system for how to decide which activities in the economy are contributing significantly to the climate transition. So things obviously like the electric vehicles, the development of electric vehicles or renewable energies, but there's a lot of other activities that are contributing significantly or in a measurable way to this energy transition and to a more sustainable economy. So the idea was to create a classification system, and originally it was to direct finance. So it was for the finance sector. And it was to say, we're going to have the system so that you can say, you can see in your portfolios what percentage is going towards green. And this is useful for public sector investment, right? It's also useful for private sector investment. So it was to say, okay, so now private sector companies are going to have to do this. So what's interesting about that is that it doesn't just apply to financial sector organizations and corporates who are based in the EU who have to report that data to the financial community. It's actually applicable for the world, because you're going to have organizations like a BlackRock, for example, that sells funds in the EU. If those funds are sold in the EU, they have to be able to report on the percentage of that fund that's invested in green activities, right? Which means that any company in that fund, whether it's based in the EU or somewhere else, is going to be held to that standard. So this is actually a very big transformational piece of legislation. And what's going to be interesting is how it plays out. I think for the tech sector in particular, it's going to be quite difficult. The whole ICT, information communication technology sector, is classified as an enabling technology. And so we are going to have to come up with a methodology, which does not exist yet, about how to prove that we're helping the rest of the economy green itself. And so there's two sides to the way the taxonomy works today. There is a side on green IT, which is you need to prove that your own operations in terms of your data centers, your network equipment is as green and efficient as possible. So that's one part of how you'll be held accountable. But the other part is, what is your technology doing for the rest of the world? And that today there is no clear methodology. And so that's already starting a lot of organizations thinking. There's the European Green Digital Coalition. There's a lot of organizations now being tasked with thinking about how can you quantify across the entire ICT sector, what is their contribution to enabling the greening of the economy? And so just to give you an idea of how that translates operationally, we are having to do that right now, because my company next year, based on 2021 revenues, has to report the percentage of our revenues that enabled the greening of the economy. Incredibly difficult exercise for software in particular.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. Yes, this is a lot of work ahead, right? But it's important regulation, and it paves the way it sets the baseline at least. Ahmed, anything to share maybe on the AI privacy aspect of regulation coming up in Europe?
Yeah. Currently, the European Union is working in a project, as in GDPR spirit, to regulate AI models, and they are working. I think there is already a project, the text target text that was published for review, comment, and so on, and the target we feel, and I'm happy to see that this is happening, because it will help increase the consciousness of people that working in AI. And this text is defining three categories of use cases: the forbidden use cases, where the AI is really going to use privacy data and has a bad consequence of the people life, and that could infringe already existing rules and laws. This is clear. Sensible use cases that will be subject to certification and validation. So people that will work on these models need to validate their model with data analysis, complementary exploration to prove that these models are safe, are fair, and are not generating discriminations. This is for the use cases that could have an important impact on the life. For example, solutions to decide who to hire or to decide how to whom attribute habitats or whatever, and the other use cases that will not be subject to certification. These are for the use cases that are really that have low impact in the life of people, and that will not be susceptible to generate discriminations. But some rules will be put in place to be sure that people are applying the state of the art to check the models, to explain them, to provide for people the reasons, and that's why we are at Palo IT really working on the ability to explain models, because some models are by definition and by construction explanatory models and based on mathematical models that we are able to explain why we had this decision based on the variables and the input we have. And the other models, for example, deep learning and neural networks, are by construction black boxes. We cannot explain the results. So there are a lot of research works on that to be sure that we're able to explain the decisions, because this probably will be mandatory in the future.
Thank you, Ahmed. Yeah, obviously a lot of important regulatory compliance needs coming up for companies worldwide. We are perfectly on time for starting and opening up the question to the audience. We have a few coming in the chat. One very interesting and obviously very crucial question is the question of materiality of tech and AI, meaning obviously the environmental impact and everything that takes that takes from the earth to actually run AI solutions. Maybe this is a question for Jonathan. Jonathan, do you want to deep dive into this, or even like not just scratch the surface of the question? Because
scratch the surface more likely, yeah. Just given the time we have. But in typical consulting fashion, I'm going to first ignore that and move back just a second to talk about regulation, and then I'll come back to materiality. I just wanted to add something that I think is important from a broader, again, I'm adding broader context here. Very important specific regulatory activity around the tech in question, but this sort of fits into a larger landscape. And I want to talk, I want to add beyond the green taxonomy, beyond the specific EU regulation on AI, this broader regulatory landscape in the field of human rights. We have, of course, a number of different regulatory movements that are important, not only for tech, but also specifically geared toward a lot of the same impacts that we'll see in the tech space. So, of course, we've been reporting on things like the Modern Slavery Act legislation for many years, especially in the UK, the US, Australia. We see that now, of course, taking hold in other regions and other nations as well. We have the current EU mandatory human rights due diligence regulation, which is in place and entering in vigor, which really stands to set the floor regarding how all companies are accounting for potential human rights impacts in their value chains. And even beyond human rights, we have regulation appearing on other big pressing systemic issues like climate change, specifically the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which wasn't even a thing 5 years ago, and now is a mandatory law in the UK. And this will likely spread with the current Biden administration in the US. It might also spread globally. In my own estimation, I can't predict the future. I would imagine this will be regulated within the next 5 years in the countries that you operate in. But the tech sector also tends to be fairly unique, meaning we tend to be out ahead of regulation, on the bleeding edge, and regulation tends to catch up years later sometimes, which means there's an even higher expectation of tech, that we need to be looking at soft regulation. We need to be looking at what the activists and the activist stakeholders are saying today, the pressures that they're putting onto companies to take into account non-regulated measures that, again, these elements may inevitably become tomorrow's regulations. So I think companies have even more than a responsibility to take these into account, but likely even a financial incentive to do so, to avoid any potential impacts tomorrow. So regulatory scrutiny is only increasing. I think Ahmed and Alice more eloquently shared it specifically than I can on the current work on AI in the EU, but I think that itself will likely act as a model for other emerging tech. So on regulation, in my opinion, diligence here on that landscape is the key word. But back to the question real quick, because I don't have too much to say, or at least I have too much to say that I can say in two minutes. But yeah, I mean, back to Patricia's question on materiality of AI, like, oh yeah, this is extremely important. And not just, I think, Patricia, you noted a number of issues that come up, like we can unpack this in so many ways. It's very important to have a general identification of the most material issues linked to AI, or we might call that saliency. But we also need to think about that from an impact assessment perspective. And that's often what we do at BSR. We take specific product applications and go deep on impact assessment. And again, it's interesting you mentioned Kate Crawford. She gets into a whole other realm, which I'm not qualified to speak about, but I find fascinating, and we dabble in because it's on the bleeding edge of AI, and especially facial and voice recognition, which are extremely thorny topics. She talks about the effective emotional, psychological aspects of AI, and that gets into age-old debates about what's appropriate, how to define and categorize human behavior, and how digital or sort of technological models appropriate and try to approximate human behavior. And that's sort of an insane topic, but a good one. I think she even gets into pre-crime, which brings me back to Minority Report. But in any case, yeah, absolutely important. I'd love to take that offline.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, this deserves maybe a webinar in itself, I guess, and even much more. We have another question that's more specific to Alice. So Alice, I don't know if you've seen this, but I'm going to read it out loud for everyone. So how did you convince your leaders and teams about the profitability of proactively shifting towards genuine sustainable operations? Are the short-term returns enough to convey sales, or did you also appeal to environmental responsibility?
Yeah. So it's a great question. I mean, maybe I'll just do a parenthesis to touch lightly on what John was mentioning also, and on the question from Patricia first before I go to this next one. So this question of when you talk about sort of green in the tech space, you're always talking about, or sustainability in the tech space as pertains to environmental issues, you're always talking about two sides of the story. So green IT and IT for green. And when you talk about AI, you're very often talking about examples of IT for green. So how IT is going, or how artificial intelligence is going to help us run these new systems that will help everything be more efficient and will reduce resource use, et cetera, et cetera. And then the downsides and all the risks that come with the human rights applications of these things. Also a huge amount of stuff, of work being done. And I'll just give you an example from our operations, right? So we have to account for what's called under the greenhouse gas protocol, use of goods sold. So that is actually the emissions that come from running our software. So how much energy is consumed when you're using a virtual twin, and what is the what are the estimated emissions from that energy consumption? So that is something we have to do. To calculate that, you have to understand and have estimates and models about all of the digital equipment in that value chain. So what kind of servers are you using? What kind of laptops are you using? How do those networks work? So there's a whole ecosystem right now working on measuring in a very granular way these different elements of what goes into running software, basically, or doing computing. And so massive amounts of work have been done, a huge field of study around full life cycle analysis of hardware equipment. This is going to be one of the first areas of, I think, obligatory labeling within the EU. So there's already some big players who have committed to putting carbon labels, for example, on every piece of IT equipment they sell. That is going to become mandatory fairly quickly. So there is a whole industry around measuring the full life cycle impact, including use of rare metals, et cetera. And that's going to help shift towards this circular economy model, where basically you have this concept, the legal concept of extended manufacturer liability, which means basically you make something, you own it. It is your responsibility. So either you're just paying a huge tax on it to deal with, to pay governments basically to recycle it and reuse those materials, or you actually literally have to take it back and reuse it. So that's what you're seeing in the car industry, for example, with Renault's Refactory, where they're taking back their own cars and they're reusing the materials. So this sort of circular green IT is definitely a big deal right now, as Jonathan said. On the question of how do you move an organization, so I would say that the Chief Sustainability Officer's main job is just being sort of a change agent within organizations. So we are not the ones who know most about anything. We know a little bit about everything, but mostly our job is to move the organization. So it's a really good question about how do you get people to move. And all I can say is, speaking from personal experience, I'm creating this function here at Dassault Systems. I created it in a financial services firm more than 10 years ago now. All I can say is that the world is very different, and this job is so much easier today. So I do not have to explain to people why climate change is a relevant issue for this organization. I do not have to explain to them what carbon emissions are. I do not have to do any of that work anymore. So for me, the people within Dassault Systems, especially because of the purpose of the organizations around driving sustainable innovation and about the use cases of how our technology have transformed industries, from shifting from combustion engines to electric vehicles, for example. The world's first solar airplane was designed with this software. All of the big disruptive changes have been using this software. So people within my company understand that this is a massive opportunity for us. This is the world's biggest innovation challenge, probably, that we've ever realized was an innovation challenge. And with what's different from the other innovation challenges is that it's not just to grow more, it's like to save us. So there's a massive incentive to innovate, and I am finding it very easy. And so I would say people as citizens are feeling that environmental sustainability argument, like they feel like they are responsible, but I don't have to tell them that anymore. And then the other piece about, do they see commercial incentives in our company? For sure. There is and in fact, where I sit in the organization is a very customer facing function. So I am brought into lots of customer meetings. I mean, this is a key strategic commercial topic for our company.
Thank you, Alice. And actually, we have another question coming in about ecosystem. So I don't know which of you wants to take that on, but I know, Alice, we've mentioned how entire ecosystem can be enabled by tech with localization. Ahmed, also you've mentioned this when we were preparing, so I vote for Ahmed also, Jonathan. If Ahmed, you want to answer that.
Yeah, just in a few words. Of course, it's not a discovery for anybody to say that thanks to technology today, we are able to very easily exchange, discuss, build solutions, work in an open source or community way on solutions. So, of course, technology is not a magical solution, but will probably help to work in these projects rather than rejecting all the technology and going back to work in papers and books and wait to print something to share. Of course, the technology will help to increase the collaboration and speed up building solution, test them, and so on, thanks to solutions like Dassault Systems to build models, analyze, and earn reduce time and energy to find solutions, of course.
Thank you, Ahmed. I don't think there is any other question coming in, but maybe we can do a quick tour de table of what would be your, one piece of advice for each of you, for people, wanting to do things better when it comes to using tech and AI. Who wants to go first? Ahmed, since you have the floor, go ahead.
Yeah, just as the end word, I would say that the purpose of this meetup was just to say that the technology is not good or bad by design. It's up to us, users, designers, managers, entrepreneurs, to decide that we have understood what are the challenges of our time and use this technology in the right way by choosing the use cases, working in a conscious way, how to evaluate the impact, and not just suppose that it's magic and it will run by itself. We need to analyze, to define the targets and the objectives, to monitor them, and use this technology to go in the right direction.
Thank you, Ahmed. Alice, any other piece of advice as a Chief of Sustainability Officer?
Yeah, I don't know if it's advice from a CSO or it's just from Alice. I would say I think the main thing is, well, one of the key takeaways, I think for those of us now that I'm part of this group working in technology, I think is to, I would say, temper.
Hello? Hello?
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, you're
Judith, are you speaking?
Excuse me, I don't mean to be. I'm so.
You can put yourself on mute. Hello, Judith. I know Judith.
Go ahead, Alice.
So I would say just sort of to temper the hubris, I would say. So for me, this whole thing, the whole climate crisis and most of sustainability is, or should be, if you think about it at a very high level, this is an exercise in humility. So this is sort of putting us back in our place. And I think in the tech industry, we really need to think about that. So as the Ellen MacArthur Foundation likes to say, we cannot recycle our way out of this problem. We can also not tech innovate our way out of this problem. There is a fundamental mindset shift and a human shift in the way we behave and the way we think about what growth means, what well-being means. Having more stuff is not growth and is not well-being. And I think there's a really fundamental issue there, which is that we're not just going to replace, I mean, when you see sort of electric vehicle Hummers and electric vehicle, we need to reduce first. We are taking too much out of this planet. We are extracting too much. We are destroying too much. And it will come back to bite us as it has with the pandemic and as it has with growing inequality. It will come back and it will destroy us. So we need to be humble and be more careful, I think, in what we think tech can do and realize what it can't do, and that's about us. So that would be my main thing to think about.
Humility lessons. Yes. Jonathan, final word?
Sure. Really happy to. I mean, I guess, what I want to say is I did start with doom and gloom, but I want to call on companies and folks on the line to certainly be bold. I think you heard it from Ahmed and Alice. Don't be afraid in pushing the envelope when it comes to your current solutions. Don't go out, creating solutions and trying to find a problem to apply them to. Certainly, let's address the problems, but let's also not be naive. Let's explore. Let's see, what type of positive impact we can create, while also trying to minimize the negative impact. And I'd also say, don't forget the basics. Coming from me in sustainability, it's worth diving into these broader notions of sustainability. We didn't really talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion specifically, or the social impact side, but it's worth taking a step back and looking at, for your organization, the notion that Patricia mentioned, this notion of materiality, or what is highest priority for you based on the pressures you're facing internally and externally, beyond AI and automation, beyond the emerging tech solutions you have. And in that vein, just a quick plug, BSR, myself actually, we're holding a climate crash course meetup next Tuesday, specifically for EMEA-based high-growth tech companies. And you are all invited. I'll share the link in the chat just a second from now, but you can also feel free to contact me on LinkedIn. And now back to the topic today, speaking for the group, if you're interested in this topic from today's webinar and you want to go further, but you may not have had your questions ready or your challenges top of mind, we're making an offer to the first people who write us an email. We'd like to propose you a 1-hour workshop together with Ahmed and myself, where we can help you think through these potential negative and positive impacts of your work. This is completely free and it will be limited, so do reach out. And maybe Stephanie, I can turn back to you. You can share with folks how they can actually reach out.
Wow, that's thank you, Jonathan. Yes, of course, we will share with this group a contact form, and there will be the possibility to actually register your interest to meet with Jonathan. This is obviously this opens for new questions, more work. And tech is definitely not the solution in itself, but it's more how we collaborate together and how we make a good use of it that will hopefully help with the solution. Thanks everyone, we'll be in touch, and thank you to our wonderful speakers, Alice, Ahmed, Jonathan. This was great, and thank everyone. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.